My sister was the one who married the crown prince. I, on the other hand, ended up with the capital's most notorious young wastrel, General Qin, the very man who'd once been completely obsessed with her. A decade passed. The crown prince became emperor, yet he showered all his affection on his true love, casting my sister aside. Whispers even circulated that he intended to depose her from the empress's throne. Meanwhile, the young General Qin, after our marriage, had shed every trace of his former dissolute ways. He rose to command the northern frontier, invented glassware that revived trade along the borders, and I was hailed by the people as the goddess. When we met again, he was leading a mighty army into the capital, determined to stage a coup and seize the dragon throne for himself. On the day his forces stormed the imperial palace, I found my sister deep within its walls, gaunt and withered beyond recognition. "So he's about to become emperor," she said, her voice hollow, "and you're still the only one by his side." He swore back then that he'd marry no one but me. How dare he let all that fortune fall to you in the end? She set the palace ablaze, taking me with her in death. When I opened my eyes again, I had returned to the moment we were first betrothed. "Mother, I want to marry young General Qin Tilda. I don't want to enter the palace." When I heard my sister, Shen Song-yu, coaxing our mother, I knew she had been reborn as well. It was precisely at this time that an imperial edict had been issued, specifically designating a daughter of the Shen family to enter the palace as the crown princess. The Shen family was a lineage of upright civil officials. My grandfather's generation had served as the emperor's tutor. Not only was our family's reputation spotless, but the Shen women were also blessed with the beauty of lotus blossoms. Unfortunately, by this generation, my father had only two daughters, me and Shen Song-yu. The Imperial Astronomical Bureau had once predicted, "The Shen family has a daughter with the bearing of a phoenix. She will ensure the Shen family's prosperity for 100 years. My mother had always believed that this phoenix must be Shen Song-yu. Her delivery of Song-yu had been remarkably smooth, but when it came to me, she endured immense suffering, nearly losing her life in the process. Shen Song-yu was eloquent and adept at winning her parents' favor. Renowned as a talented young woman from childhood, she became the jewel of the capital after reaching womanhood, with no shortage of admirers in the city. Young General Qin was the most flamboyant and outrageous among them. He frequented the red light district, yet claimed he would marry no one but Song-yu. Nonsense. Young General Qin is a notorious playboy in the capital. Just last month, the Imperial Guards had to fish him out of a brothel by the lake. How could such a man be worthy of my dear daughter? Mother Tilda, young General Qin is just young. He'll settle down once he's married. Besides, if she goes to the palace, she'll have to compete with a whole bunch of women. How could she possibly live comfortably there?" Shen Song-yu shook her mother's hand and whispered in her ear, "Qin Lang, he's bound to have a great destiny. Mother, trust me." Mother looked at her, then twirled the prayer beads on her fingers, her face betraying no emotion. She was weighing her options, wanting what was best for her beloved Song-yu, yet not wanting me to end up in a mess. "Shen Qinxing, do you want to enter the palace?" Caught off guard by the sudden question, I lowered my head and stammered, I wouldn't dare. Entering the palace means specifically asking for my sister." Mother was very pleased with me. Shen Song-yu was also very pleased. She looked at me with a half-smile. Back then, the Imperial Astronomical Bureau predicted the presence of a phoenix's grace, but they didn't specify which daughter. It seems little Zhu is about to rise to become a phoenix. But what she didn't know was that young General Qin had long since been replaced. He was no longer that idle, good-for-nothing fool. The Qin Lang who had once been utterly devoted to Song-yu had drowned in the river long ago. The current Qin Lang was a different man entirely. Cold, ruthless, and willing to do anything for power and money. He married me only to keep me as a decorative ornament in the mansion, paving the way for his grand ambitions, even offering me up to the powerful and influential of the Jiwu kingdom, all to gain a political advantage. But Shen Song-yu hadn't given a moment's thought to why he'd changed so drastically. She was in such a rush to get married. Well, let her have that good fortune. Mother didn't agree to Shen Songyu's request right away. It was obvious. One option was to marry the crown prince in the palace. The other was to marry a notorious playboy in the capital, a man who didn't even hold a title yet. He might just be all flash on the outside. Who knew what life would be like once she was married to him? But Shin Seong-yu was set on her course. First, she claimed an immortal had appeared in her dream to offer guidance to the family. She said her grandmother was showing signs of illness and insisted on summoning the imperial physician to the house immediately. Sure enough, that very night, grandmother developed a high fever that would not subside. She claimed there would be a disaster in the southwest and told father to prepare relief efforts in advance. At first, father was skeptical. After all, even the Imperial Astronomical Bureau hadn't predicted it. 3 days later, the earth indeed trembled in the southwest. Because father was fully prepared, the emperor was even more pleased with the Shin family. After a few such incidents, father and mother fully believed that she truly had an immortal guiding her. They joyfully prepared to marry her off to Qin Lang. At the same time, they sent a palace matron to instruct me in the etiquette required for my marriage into the palace. Shin Seong-yu finally got her wish, and whenever she saw me, she would look at me with pity. Little sister Chinching, you'd better study hard. It's not easy to survive in these deep palace walls. With your frail frame, be careful you don't get devoured until there's nothing left of you. My eyes were red, and I put on a look of helpless vulnerability. Sister, I'm so scared. Shin Seong-yu was in high spirits and even rewarded me with a golden hairpin. Since you're taking my place in this marriage, you might as well enjoy a few days of comfort. Once she was gone, I couldn't help but laugh. Pity. Pity me for what? Pity that I'm going to be the empress. Or pity that my good life won't last more than a few years. If Qin Lang's ingenious inventions no longer belong to him, would things still go so smoothly for him? Shin Seong-yu and I were married on the same day. Although my parents had packed her dowry into a full 30 chests, it still fell far short of the imperial wedding standards. Shin Seong-yu's expression was slightly off, but when she saw Qin Lang personally come to escort her, while I was merely escorted to the wedding palanquin by the stern matron, she cheered up again. Little sister, go ahead and enjoy all this boundless wealth and luxury, Tilda. I nodded, appearing as meek and docile as ever. She was happy, and so was I. The journey to the palace wasn't exactly smooth sailing. It took quite a while before I finally sat upon the bridal bed. My heart was filled with indescribable excitement. 2 or 3 dozen attendants stood inside and outside the room. Even the bedding was trimmed with gold. The imperial family truly possessed boundless wealth and splendor. When the crown prince lifted my veil, I was daydreaming about a life of luxury and privilege. As I looked directly into his face, my cheeks flushed slightly. Crown Prince Jingsha. I had a very vivid impression of him from my previous life. Qin Lang was always gathering information on him. Portraits of him hung throughout the entire mansion. He could be considered a diligent emperor. Aside from neglecting the empress, there was little to fault him for. The man's gentle, slightly hoarse voice rang in my ear as he leaned close. Are you Chen Xing? Do you know that I sought to marry Seong-yu? She didn't want to marry him, so I'm here to take her place. Jingsha seemed taken aback by my directness. He paused for a moment, then laughed through gritted teeth. You're certainly straightforward. Aren't you afraid this crown prince's mansion is a den of tigers and dragons? I shook my head and replied calmly. What the crown prince needs is someone who can run the mansion, manage the inner quarters, and fulfill the duties of a crown princess. As for who that person is, does it really matter? When it comes to managing the household accounts and observing etiquette, I'm no worse than Seong-yu. You're a clever one, after all. Seeing him relent, I breathed a sigh of relief. It seemed my recollections from my previous life were accurate. Crown Prince Jingsha was cold-hearted and aloof. His dissatisfaction with Seong-yu stemmed from her affectation. An emperor simply doesn't have time to dwell on romantic entanglements day in and day out. The night was short, and I knew I had successfully caught Jingsha's eye. The next day, in accordance with imperial protocol, I had to pay my respects to the emperor and empress and receive the prince's residence token. I was busy from morning till night. The Empress had originally intended to make things difficult for me because the Shen family hadn't sent my elder sister to marry into the palace. But I skillfully navigated all these ceremonial challenges with ease. I held a full cup of hot tea with steady grace. Jingsha was even a little surprised. My crown princess has mastered etiquette so well. In truth, I had studied these etiquettes. My father had hired the same tutor for both Tsong Yu and me. Whenever Tsong Yu went out to play, I would practice in the inner quarters. Combined with the muscle memory from my previous life, my etiquette was so flawless that even the Empress could find no fault with it. On our wedding night, I wasn't just bragging to him. When it comes to being a crown princess, I'm practically a pro. After returning from the palace, Ji Liangdi came to pay her respects and offer me tea. Ji Liangdi was the crown prince's white moonlight, the woman he favored above all others in his previous life. She grew up with him from childhood and became his concubine after reaching the age of maturity. In Shen Tsongyu's words, she was a scheming vixen, skilled only in the art of flattery. Shen Tsongyu looked down on this concubine, yet she often got involved in their rivalry, nearly ruining herself in the process. I couldn't care less, as long as she didn't come dancing before me, it was no problem. The crown prince had given me wealth and power. Having a favorite pet of his own was hardly a big deal. In her previous life, Shen Tsongyu had gone to such extremes, yet she never reached the point of being deposed as empress. Crown Prince Jingsha was merely a partner. As long as he didn't abandon his duties in the imperial court, he could favor whomever he pleased. He didn't even need me to bear children. What better life could be so comfortable? The more I thought about it, the more satisfied I became. I bestowed clothes and jewelry upon Ji Liangdi, showing her no hardship, but instead told her to return home and rest well. As for myself, I picked up the prince's mansion's ledgers and began to examine them carefully. The income was substantial, but daily expenses were equally high, leaving little surplus. I summoned all the housekeepers and began to audit the accounts and review the staff one by one. Gradually, I got the affairs of the Crown Prince's residence back on track. I even organized the administrative tasks the Crown Prince needed to handle into a register and placed it in his study, waiting for him to attend to them each day. Occasionally, I would exchange a few words with him about state affairs. Though I had never read the 4 books and 5 classics, nor had I been exposed to Qin Lang's so-called progressive ideas, I often earned praise from Crown Prince Jingsha. Gradually, a subtle partnership developed between Prince Jingsha and me. When the day of my return to my parents' home arrived, I assumed I would have to go back on my own, so I was having the gifts and carriage prepared. To my surprise, as I was leaving the prince's residence, Jingsha was standing at the gate, reaching out to take my hand. In my previous life, Shen Tsongyu had returned to her parents' home alone. I suppose it was a matter of saving face for him, and he was saving face for me as well. Back at the Shen residence, Shen Tsongyu was already nestled beside Mother, her little face flushed. Mother, Qin Lang treats me very well. I'm the only one in the inner quarters, and on the very first day, he promised me he would never take a concubine. Good, good, good. At least the Qin family knows a thing or two about propriety. If he treats you badly, you must tell Mother, and I will certainly seek justice for you. I stood to the side, feeling like an outsider. But I was used to it. Ever since I was a child, this maternal love had belonged solely to Shen Tsongyu. When I'd discovered Qin Lang's unsavory deeds earlier, I'd sought my mother's help, but this was what she'd said back then: "Qinqing, you're old enough to know better by now." The two of them chatted on until the announcement that dinner was served, only then remembering that I was standing there. The Crown Prince and young General Qin are waiting in the front hall. Shen Tsongyu murmured. Why did he come? He actually came for you. Tsongyu. What's wrong? Shen Tsongyu composed herself, glancing at me with the look of a thief caught in the act. It was utterly ridiculous. She had made what she believed to be the right choice, yet she was still thrown off balance by the Crown Prince Jingsha's preferential treatment. The front hall. The meal was far from peaceful. Shen Tsongyu kept stealing glances at me while she ate. Not even Qin Lang's displays of tenderness could snap her out of it. As for Jingsha and me, we ate our meal with proper decorum. However, There were large shrimp on the table. I've been allergic to shrimp since childhood. Even the smell of them makes me feel a bit queasy. But I merely wrinkled my nose. The Crown Prince noticed, however, and ordered the shrimp to be removed. Clatter! Shen Tsung-yu slammed her bowl to the floor, shattering it into pieces, and cut her hand in the process. Qin Lang immediately shielded her with his body, grasping her injured hand and asking anxiously, "Tsung-yu, are you all right? How could you be so careless?" The servants were in a flurry, scrambling to clean up the shards and debris. Tears welled up in Shen Tsung-yu's eyes. "It's my fault. I wasn't careful." Qin Lang quickly summoned the imperial physician and was about to take Shen Tsung-yu away. Her parents watched Qin Lang's actions and nodded approvingly. He truly treated her as if she were a precious treasure. Shen Tsung-yu even shot me a defiant glance, as if to say, "So what if the Crown Prince accompanied me back to my family home? I'll never be loved and cherished like this." But I just thought it was childish. Qin Lang was always putting on this act of being a loving couple in public, only to later offer his wife to others in exchange for greater rewards. And my sister, Shen Tsung-yu, she's well-read and talented, but she lacks common sense. Such tactics to vie for favor might work in the inner quarters, but in the imperial harem, they leave one utterly without dignity. We finally finished that foul, stifling meal. Jingsha also made an excuse about palace business, using it as a pretext to take me away. Once inside the palanquin, I picked up the ledgers beside me to continue reading, but Jingsha snatched the books from my hands. "Now that you're the Crown Princess's consort, you shouldn't associate with people you don't like." "It doesn't matter." Jingsha began to laugh again. "You two sisters are truly amusing. Your sister acts like a concubine, while you're more like the matriarch of the household. Chenxing, when will you start vying for favor too?" I paused in surprise. Shen Tsung-yu's tactics did indeed resemble those of a concubine. Only a concubine needs to vie for favor and seek her master's love. Life at the Crown Prince's mansion was exceptionally busy. In addition to managing the household, I also had to build up some influence. Jingsha was very busy as well. He was an exceptionally diligent man who cared deeply for his people. I suppose if it weren't for the vast wealth Qin Lang amassed from his inventions in his previous life, there's no way he could have overthrown the throne, risen to become a regional warlord, and entered the palace to assassinate the emperor. What I hadn't anticipated was that in this life, Qin Lang would rise to prominence even more swiftly. Perhaps Shen Tsung-yu, the jewel of the capital, is better suited to the divine maiden persona than I, a mere nobody. At the Mid-Autumn Palace banquet, in addition to attendees from the imperial harem and the Crown Prince's residence, the families of high-ranking ministers were also present. After raising his cup and delivering his toast, the emperor made a point of mentioning Qin Lang. In the past, young General Qin was always at the Red Dust Pavilion or the Dew Pavilion. Now that he's married and has settled down, he's a completely different person. He even asked this emperor for an official post, and he's handling it quite competently. Consort Shu smiled. "Indeed. Just look at Shenjia's daughter, Yu, she's quite capable. The wine we're drinking today was actually presented by her." The ministers discussed and tasted the wine. It was truly a feast for the eyes, and they couldn't help but marvel at it. The flavor is rich and mellow, with a fragrant aroma filling the air. What a fine wine. I never expected the young General Qin's wife to be such a skilled winemaker. The consort Shu covered her mouth and giggled, then immediately ordered that Shen Tsung-yu be presented with a set of headdresses and ornaments befitting a court consort. The consort Shu was Qin Lang's aunt. Having borne 3 imperial princes through her own womb, she had always been at odds with the empress. If it weren't for Crown Prince Jing's diligence, who knows what state of affairs we might be in. "Since you're so talented, I wonder if the Crown Princess has any." Before she could finish, I rose and performed a deep curtsy. "Your Majesty, the Crown Princess is merely managing the Crown Prince's residence at home, doing her utmost to assist him. She truly has no time for such things." Very well," the Empress replied, repeating her approval several times. "It is enough for the Crown Princess to set a good example." The noble consort felt embarrassed. I merely had a whim after tasting the red wine. The women of the Shen family are all quite capable, but inventing this red wine is truly beyond the ordinary. After the emperor spoke, the empress said nothing more, as if putting the matter to rest once and for all. The ministers then began to praise the red wine one after another. As the palace banquet came to a close, I overheard some of the ladies-in-waiting whispering among themselves. I'd heard before that Shen Tsung-yu was destined for greatness. She was originally meant to be the crown princess. Yes. It seems she truly has good fortune in her destiny. Qin Lang used to be such a scoundrel. Now you can see him at the Jinwu Guard before dawn. He's practically a different person. Do you think the crown prince might have wanted to marry Shen Tsung-yu back then too? Oh my, you mustn't say such things. I shook my head and smiled, paying it no mind. Crown Prince Jingshe, however, frowned. These women, they're so prone to believing such nonsense. Don't dwell on it. You just need to fulfill your duties as crown princess. I smiled at his earnest gaze. Then the crown prince must also do his part. Yes, I will do my best. Moonlight slanted across the low palace walls as Jingshe and I walked side by side, feeling nothing but a sense of peaceful contentment. After the mid-autumn palace banquet, Shen Tsung-yu became even more outspoken. She began reciting Shui Jiaoji Tu and When Will the Bright Moon Be? I raise my cup to ask the heavens, drawing praise from scholars and poets alike. She opened a tavern serving only that one variety of red wine, drawing crowds so large that streets emptied as people flocked to taste the wine praised by the emperor. Qin Lang had taught her all of this. But Shen Tsung-yu thoroughly relished this feeling of being the center of attention. Rumors were even spreading among the common folk that Shen Tsung-yu was a divine maiden destined for greatness. Qin Lang also began to appear frequently in both court and society. I had spotted him from afar several times within the palace. For a time, the couple was the talk of the capital. But sister, will all of this truly go as you wish? At the Grand Princess's banquet, the original purpose was to select a bride for her son, Chen Xian. After a group of young ladies had performed, the crowd began to urge Shen Tsung-yu to recite a poem. The Grand Princess was also full of interest. I've long heard that young General Qin has taken a talented woman as his wife. Shen Tsung-yu rose slowly, holding her teacup as she began. Have you not seen the waters of the Yellow River coming down from the heavens? The eldest princess's son, Chen Xian, paled slightly. He had just returned from Suzhou and Hangzhou, where everyone recited Ode to Wine. That poem was clearly written by an old scholar. How could it have become Shen Tsung-yu's? When Shen Tsung-yu finished reciting the final two lines, when life is at its best, one must revel in joy, let not the golden cup stand empty before the moon, Chen Xian was utterly stunned. He didn't know if it was because he hadn't been back in the capital for so long, but plagiarism had apparently become so commonplace here. Sure enough, this recitation of Ode to Wine won thunderous applause from the entire hall. Chen Xian spoke in a daze. Lady Qin, did you truly write this poem yourself? But everyone in Suzhou and Hangzhou knows it by heart. The entire hall erupted in an uproar, with everyone whispering among themselves. If an ordinary person had spoken, people might have doubted them, but Chen Xian was the eldest princess's only son. He was the last person who would have any reason to lie. I knew Lady Qin couldn't have composed such poetry while confined to her boudoir. Could it be plagiarized? If it weren't for the eldest princess, the young master would still be kept in the dark. Qin Lang's expression turned strange. Could there be other time travelers in this world? His mind raced. This poem was inspired by a dream the lady had. I never imagined there would be another in this world with such an opportunity. Chen Xian seemed unconvinced by this explanation, but Qin Lang immediately used Shen Tsung-yu's illness as an excuse to leave the banquet. The look Shen Tsung-yu gave Qin Lang was dark enough to make water pool in it. I, however, was thoroughly enjoying the spectacle. The quatrain received in a dream had long been celebrated throughout Suzhou and Hangzhou, even compiled into the 300 poems known even to children on the street. And all of this was, in fact, my handiwork. Qin Lang, Can you conjure up a goddess now, too? Hurry up and leave. Qin Lang had no patience to argue with Shen Tsung-yu, nor did he want people to continue making a spectacle of him. Shen Tsung-yu gritted her teeth in frustration. She didn't understand why her husband, who had always been so tender and considerate toward her, had suddenly changed so drastically. Reluctantly, she followed Qin Lang away. Although she'd nearly caused a major scandal in high society, forcing her to keep a low profile for quite some time. As long as she stayed away from the capital, she would once again become the divine Lady Qin. Life went on, neither eventful nor dull, and I finally got the prince's household affairs in order. Jingsha would occasionally come to the study to work, and we went about our respective business. Jingsha said, "Chenxing, why are you so tense? You burn the midnight oil day and night, working even harder than I, the crown prince." I merely smiled. Whenever I closed my eyes, I was haunted by memories of being burned alive in my previous life and being kept captive in Qin Lang's inner courtyard. Even after being reborn, it was difficult to erase those scars. Especially knowing that one day he would lead troops to stage a coup, I dared not slack off. Father summoned me today to review an essay. The moment I saw the handwriting on that treatise, I knew it was Qin Lang's work. The characters were crooked and uneven, but the arguments were indeed novel. Young General Qin. Ham. He's quite calculating, and the few tasks he's handled for Father have been executed quite flawlessly. But Father wanted to grant him a position in the Imperial Secretariat, and he instead requested to be stationed at the frontier. If he didn't go to the frontier, how would he get around to working on his inventions? In the capital, even a single small cannon would attract the guards. Yet in his previous life, Qin Lang had established a base on the frontier to experiment with gunpowder. Unfortunately, in the end, it didn't yield significant results. It fell far short of his expectations. It was around this time that he received the Emperor's decree and volunteered to go to the frontier. Within a few days, he quietly left the capital with his family. But what I didn't expect was that this year, their departure wouldn't go so smoothly. The Shen family threw a huge scene. Shen's mother lost control on the spot and smashed an imperial vase. That frontier, what a bitter, frigid place it is. So many have gone there and never returned in this lifetime. My Tsung-yu, have you ever endured such hardship? If you go with him, I'll disown you as my daughter. At the same time, Qin Lang was also displeased. Tsung-yu has already married me. I won't let her suffer. Since she's become a member of my family, she must follow wherever I go, like a hen following the rooster or a dog following its master. How can a married couple live apart? If Shen Tsung-yu didn't accompany him to the frontier, how could he make the most of this beauty he'd so painstakingly nurtured? Shen Tsung-yu dared not mention Qin Lang's plan to station troops at the frontier, so she could only try to placate both sides. Shen Tsung-yu wasn't exactly known for her patience to begin with, and on top of that, Qin Lang's mother, Lady Qin, had packed several stunning beauties into their luggage for the journey to the frontier. Shen Tsung-yu completely lost it and got into a huge fight with Qin Lang. You clearly said I was the only one in the inner quarters. What's the deal with all these beauties now? Is your mother afraid that if I don't go, there'll be no one to look after you? Shen Tsung-yu, can't you be a little more reasonable? I don't need these beauties, but could you please keep your family out of our business? Qin Lang, you don't love me anymore. In the end, it was Shen Tsung-yu who relented. On a dark and stormy night, she and Qin Lang slipped away from the capital in secret. They didn't even leave a single letter behind, as if they had completely severed all ties with the capital. After they left, my life became even more peaceful. In fact, Shen Tsung-yu's sudden departure without a word had broken my parents' hearts. Occasionally, they would even invite me back to the Shen mansion for a meal. Having lost one daughter, they finally remembered they still had another. 5 years have passed, and I rarely think about my past life anymore. Jingsha is a dutiful husband. Aside from having a favorite concubine, there's nothing else to fault him for. I never made things difficult for this concubine. Not only did she never lack for food or clothing, but during festivals she even received dividends from the crown prince's estate. With money to spare, Ji Liangdi lived comfortably and never caused any trouble. She often sent me embroidered gifts and snacks, and between the lines, she made it clear she wanted to follow in my footsteps as her boss. You see, the women in the inner courtyard aren't necessarily destined to be enemies. Just as everything was moving in a positive direction. Until one day. While I was dressing, my maid Xiaotsue came to report, Princess Consort, envoys from the kingdom of Jiwu have arrived. A banquet will be held in the palace tonight. The kingdom of Jiwu, that's the one to which Qin Lang sent me. I still remember that absurd court. Guards carried me, clad in a sheer gown, into the hall. The emperor and high officials of Jiwu gazed at me as if admiring an animal. The desecration of the divine maiden aroused these men. It was as if a tear had been ripped open in my nightmare, and the memories surged forth, jostling to the surface. Crown Princess. What's wrong? Are you unwell? Xiao Kui's voice snapped me back to reality. I had snapped the comb in two, and a cold sweat broke out on my back. I'm fine. Go on with my preparations. I steadied my composure. Some things must be faced. Now I am the Crown Princess. I am no longer that divine maiden drifting like a water lily on the frontier. There is nothing to fear. The people of our dynasty live in peace and prosperity. Our army is strong and our horses are sturdy. The envoys from Jiwu have come merely to pay their respects as a small nation. A dozen or so envoys from Jiwu have arrived, even their prince is here. They've brought gifts to seek stability along the border. They brought not only local specialties and gold, but also several exotic beauties. These beauties had blue eyes and fair skin, dressed in foreign attire that left large swaths of their bodies exposed. They showed no fear of the court officials' stares and even swayed their bodies in a flirtatious manner. The emperor's eyes narrowed to slits. He had long since ceased to attend to state affairs, entrusting most of the governance to the crown prince while devoting himself solely to his own pleasures. These are our princesses from Jiwu, brought as a tribute to the emperor and the crown prince. Very well, the emperor said, patting his throne. The envoys from Jiwu have shown such sincerity. Ask of me whatever you desire. The Jiwu envoy then submitted a petition and exchanged toasts with the court officials. As the wine flowed and the mood grew lively, the envoy stared intently at my face and exclaimed, I met the crown princess's elder sister at the frontier. Indeed, both sisters are stunningly beautiful. Jingsha frowned. Envoy, speaking of the crown princess in our court is punishable by decapitation. Oh dear, my apologies. I didn't know the rules. Please don't hold it against me, Your Highness. I sneered inwardly. It seems he's already begun to covet Shen Song Yu. This minor incident was soon overshadowed by the music and dancing. Yet I had no appetite at the banquet. I didn't eat a single bite. Sure enough, Qin Lang was still following the same old playbook from his previous life. Without me, Shen Song Yu was even more at his mercy. These old fools, who knows how long they've been eyeing the goddess. As we left the palace, we were forced to take a blue-eyed beauty along in Jingsha's carriage. I shot him a withering glance, and he shrugged, as if to say, I can't help it either. Back at the Crown Prince's residence, Ji Liangdi came out to greet us. Why has the Crown Princess returned so late? I've prepared some sweet soup. It's not necessary. I shook my head and walked straight to the back courtyard. Jingsha seemed to want to say something, but swallowed his words. Ji Liangdi's gaze passed right through the Crown Prince, landing on the blue-eyed beauty behind him. She clenched the handkerchief in her hand and let out a couple of mocking sighs. Oh my, Crown Prince, do you think our Crown Princess isn't busy enough already that you're stuffing her into the back courtyard? No wonder the Crown Princess ignores you. With that, she too headed toward the back courtyard. Only the Crown Prince and the guards remained in the front hall. That night, I lay in bed half asleep, my mind still filled with thoughts of those evasive envoys. My forehead was covered in a dense sheen of sweat. In my daze, I felt an arm wrap around me from behind. Chin-shing. Xing-xing. I slowly opened my eyes. I didn't know when, but Jingsha had already climbed into bed and was holding me close against his body. You've been acting really strange today. You've never been jealous before. It's not because of that beauty, is it? What are you afraid of? In front of Jingsha, I felt as though I were invisible. He observed everything with such keen insight. He must have already figured it out. I opened my mouth, but found I couldn't speak a word. Should I tell him I've been reborn? Or that I was once treated as a plaything by these people? No matter which one, I didn't think Jingsha would believe me or share the burden with me. He just hugged me gently, as if soothing a child. Don't be afraid. I am protected by heaven's mandate. I will surely keep you safe and sound. I chuckled inwardly. Heaven's mandate. Then you wouldn't have been forced to abdicate in your previous life. Unfortunately, in my past life, I was burned to death by Shen Song-yu. I don't know what became of Jingsha in the end, but I imagine it wasn't good. In the end, I still managed to get a good night's sleep. The emperor was utterly smitten with the blue-eyed beauty presented to him. He'd even stopped attending court, and his every whim regarding her was granted without question. Yet not a single condition listed in Jiwu's petition had been granted. The Jiwu envoys came to ask why. They'd offered the most precious treasures, items even their own emperor possessed only a few of, and had come with the utmost sincerity. Jingsha offered no explanation. He simply sent someone to take the envoys from Jiwu to the marketplace. This truly opened the envoys' eyes. Are you selling glass? The vendor nodded. Yes, would you like one? It's only 20 cash. The envoy's eyes widened. Only 20 cash. Every household has it, it's hardly a rare item. The envoy carefully explored the market and found that virtually every stall sold this item. Its craftsmanship far surpassed even the tribute items he had brought with him. He immediately flew into a rage. That Qin Lang actually deceived me. The more he looked around, the more alarmed he became. The items that the kingdom of Jiwu regarded as treasures were, in fact, so commonplace in the capital that even ordinary citizens took them for granted. No wonder the emperor of the Celestial Empire wouldn't agree to our terms. It turns out that the items we brought are so commonplace here that even the common people can use them. This time, Jiwu has truly lost face. As I listened to the guard's report, I felt increasingly satisfied. My plan had indeed worked. The very items Qin Lang took such pride in had long been mass-produced and sold in the capital without his knowledge. Meanwhile, he was far away on the frontier, cut off from imperial authority and increasingly isolated from the outside world. I wonder if Qin Lang can handle the anger of the Jiwu envoys. Within a few days, the Jiwu envoys returned to the frontier. Upon their departure, they left nothing behind except for a few beauties. The following year, Shen Song-yu and Qin Lang returned to the capital. Unlike in my previous life, when they arrived with a grand procession of thousands of soldiers, this time they brought only a few attendants. They had failed to establish a connection with the kingdom of Jiwu. In fact, the emperor of Jiwu had even fallen out with him over the matter of tribute. The development of gunpowder had also not been successful. The borderlands had not become more prosperous because of him, and when he tried to recruit soldiers, no one answered the call. They could only return to the capital with their tails between their legs. The last time I saw Shen Song-yu was 7 years ago. According to the guards, they had come to the capital this time because of internal strife within the Qin family, and the illegitimate son had started his own household. The residence of the little General Qin was long gone. They had only managed to secure a small house to live in. 7 years had passed without a single letter, and the Shen family had offered her no support. I tried my best to avoid meeting her, unsure if my older sister, who had also had a hard life in this lifetime, might lose her mind. But things rarely go as planned. When I went to burn incense for blessings, I still ran into Shen Song-yu. She had long since lost the carefree, girlish charm of her youth. She was holding a young boy's hand, with only a single maidservant behind her carrying the incense offerings. It stood in stark contrast to my entourage of maids, matrons, and guards. I had no intention of exchanging pleasantries with her. I planned to leave as soon as I'd offered the incense. She stared at me for a long time, and I thought she was about to leave. But Shen Song-yu suddenly grabbed my arm. "Qinqing, why didn't you tell me back then? Heh. What? She clenched her teeth and said angrily, "Are you feeling smug?" I stared at her in shock. I absolutely couldn't let her know that I'd been reborn too. Otherwise, who knows what crazy things she might do. Sister, it was because you refused to marry the crown prince that I ended up marrying him. Shun Tsunyu's gaze was dark and inscrutable, as if she were searching for a weakness in me, but I met her eyes with complete openness. Life on the frontier seemed to have smoothed out her rough edges. She no longer had her former sharpness, her posture had softened, and tears welled up in her eyes in an instant. She clutched my clothes with her slender hands, trying to stop me from leaving. Even father and mother have turned their backs on me. Little sister, you're the crown princess now, can't you ask the crown prince to help Qin Lang? Just make him the general of the northern frontier. I've never asked you for anything before, but this is the only thing I'm asking. I looked at Shun Tsung-yu. Life at the border had clearly changed her. At least she wasn't as hard as a rock as she used to be. She'd even learned to soften her stance. It was easy to imagine what Qin Lang had done to her. Even her outer robe could barely conceal the red marks on her body. And yet, she still wished Qin Lang well. The child Shun Tsung-yu was holding by the hand was hopping up and down, completely oblivious to what his mother was doing, just tugging at her hand incessantly. That isn't your child, is it? I looked at the child beside her, calling out to Qin Xing, a hint of blue shimmering deep in my eyes. Shun Tsunyu's body began to tremble slightly. Did he force you? You knew all along. Shun Tsunyu's expression changed, and she let out a shrill, explosive scream. Then why didn't you come to save me? Why? Her emotions collapsed, and she sank to the ground, sobbing uncontrollably. No one came to save me, Wara, no one. I dismissed the maids and matrons, leaving only the guards bound by the pact of death. A divine maiden is nothing more than a plaything for others' amusement. They call her a divine maiden, but she's merely there to please those fat, bloated men of the Jiwu kingdom. Qin Lang is a pervert. He doesn't care at all about sending his wife to another man's bed. Even this bastard child. I can't even strangle him. He even threatened me, saying that if I failed to beg you today, he'd send me to those men. She muttered to herself, growing angrier by the moment. She reached out to strangle me, but was stopped by a guard, whose sword blocked her path. You knew all along. Why didn't you come save me? Why? Shun Tsung-yu curled up again, trembling, her sobs so intense she seemed on the verge of fainting. You didn't have good intentions toward me either, did you? Back then, you refused to marry the crown prince. Don't think I didn't know everything. Father and mother have always favored you more. It was you who chose to go to the frontier without looking back. Mother cried until her tears ran dry. I handed her a handkerchief. This is the path you chose for yourself. As for that scum Qin Lang, if you'd threatened to kill yourself, they wouldn't have done anything to you. Or you could have killed Qin Lang to free yourself. In the end, you just weren't ruthless enough. I, too, was once sent to the kingdom of Jiwu by Qin Lang. But back then, I pressed my dagger against the chest of the crown prince of Jiwu. I told him that if he sent me back unharmed, I would ensure their partnership with Qin Lang would yield double the profits. What's so important about a beauty? Using a beauty to secure a marriage for personal gain is the most despicable act. Qin Lang may have had ingenious inventions, but he lacked business acumen. If not for me, he would never have been able to establish himself. Shun Tsung-yu wept even louder. I'm just a woman. The frontier is harsh and cold, and Qin Lang doesn't even want me. What else can I do? She really is beyond help. Even after living 2 lifetimes, she's still a good-for-nothing. If you want to kill Qin Lang, I can help you. But don't even think about anything else. We're in the capital now, not the frontier. Even if young General Qin were to die, it would just be seen as a border tribe seeking revenge. Right. With that, I turned and left with my guards without looking back. Less than 3 days later, a messenger arrived. Shun Tsung-yu had come in person. She had no maids or servants left by her side. She barely managed to say good before hurrying away. She really had gone. just as Qin Lang was hitting another wall in the imperial court. He went home intending to take his frustration out on Shen Songyu. Shen Songyu didn't tolerate his antics as she usually did. Instead, she personally fed him the poisoned wine with her own mouth. Watching Qin Lang swallow the poison, she laughed loudly. "This is poisoned wine. Qin Lang, you're about to die. Stop dreaming of being emperor. You worthless insect, you deserve to live a pathetic life like this. When you're dead, I'll stuff your corpse into a latrine." Qin Lang's eyes widened, but he found his limbs had gone limp. "You poisonous woman! What have you done?" Shen Songyu pulled out a dagger and stabbed it viciously into his lower body. A man who sells his wife for glory. What great future could he possibly have? It's my own fault for being blinded by love, choosing a scumbag like you and giving up my position as crown princess. Qin Lang screamed, "Give me the antidote. I really can become emperor. I'm a time traveler. I don't want to die like this. I'm clearly the chosen one. Yet some time traveler beat me to it. Ah!" Unfortunately, Qin Lang had no chance left. Shen Songyu stabbed him several more times, ending his life completely. If I hadn't arrived with my men, Shen Songyu, though she'd only had a little to drink, would likely have died as well. If you'd had this kind of resolve earlier, you wouldn't have wasted all these years. Once she's fully recovered, I'll treat her to a drink. Once we've had this drink, we'll call it even." Shen Songyu was getting a bit tipsy herself. She asked hazily, "Why are you so lucky? In the last life, you followed Qin Lang to become empress, and in this life, you've got Jingsha wrapped around your finger. We're sisters, after all. Do you know what? In the last life, Jingsha said I wasn't as good as you. He said that out on the frontier, the common people all praised you. At the time, I thought it was all thanks to Qin Lang. I was his crown princess, how could he possibly praise someone else?" I think she must have been recalling events from her past life. Everyone has their own duties. As the primary wife, you must fulfill the responsibilities of a primary wife. What Jingsha needs has never been a brainless ornament who only throws tantrums. He can love many women, but only the empress can walk with him to the very end. Don't you understand yet, Shen Songyu? She pouted. I didn't expect her thick skull to ever grasp it. This outcome was already quite good. In the 10th year, the emperor passed away, and Jingsha ascended the throne. He fulfilled his duties with diligence, opened up trade, and encouraged innovation among the people. He drew upon the useful insights from the notes left behind by Qin Lang to strengthen our dynasty's power, and the common people thrived. Ji Liangdi was also elevated to the rank of consort, but she had grown tired of the pretentious competition for favor. Whenever she had free time, she'd come to play mahjong with me. What good are men? All that fighting over little affection. You can't even bypass the empress. I'd rather stick with you and live comfortably here in the harem. In Jingsha's harem, aside from us old hands from the crown prince's mansion, there wasn't even a full table for mahjong. He always said, "My empress, don't tire yourself so much. You always make me feel as though you should be the one ruling as emperor. When will you bear me a little princess?" Oh, I forgot to mention, our child is already 3 years old. As for Shen Songyu, her past life had been so extraordinary that she actually shaved her head and became a nun. She spends her days praying for blessings in the temple and aiding the common people, and there are actually people who sincerely call her goddess. Qin Lang's story. When I first arrived in this world, I had just been pulled out of the river. I was immediately taken back to the Qin manor. After lying in bed for a few days, I finally realized what kind of situation I had been thrust into. This was a fictional dynasty with no reliable historical precedents, and the body I had inhabited, to put it nicely, was that of a young master in a general's household. To put it bluntly, my birth mother was dead, and my father was a man who never took responsibility. No one had ever taught me anything, and my stepmother simply encouraged me to be a wastrel. True to form, this previous incarnation had lived up to expectations and become a wastrel. It was a disastrous start. That is, until the legitimate daughter of the Shen family announced she wanted to marry me. The first time I saw Shen Song-yu, I thought she was simply perfect. No man could possibly dislike her. She was far superior to her timid younger sister, who always hid in the background. I thought to myself, in this era, if I could win over such a beautiful woman, I was sure to succeed. Armed with my past memories and knowledge, I successfully brewed red wine and taught Shen Song-yu poetry and literature. A beauty needs such things to enhance her charm. What's infuriating is that there are other time travelers in this world. Someone beat me to it. Piecing together information from various sources, I discovered that this other time traveler was merely dabbling in poetry, without any groundbreaking innovations. I plan to head to the frontier to develop gunpowder. If all goes well, I'll then ally with some smaller nations to station troops. I'm determined to become emperor. The first thrilling story has come to an end. Don't go anywhere. Let's dive into the second story now. To win him over, I stopped at nothing. With a single love potion, I became his wife as I'd wished. Everyone in the capital said I'd lost all sense of decency in my quest to climb the social ladder. I suppose he thought so too. 10 years of neglect wore away every last trace of my youthful infatuation. I was desperate, I screamed, I was a shadow of my former self. He just sat calmly at his desk in the study, as if watching a madwoman. Isn't this exactly what you wanted? You've secured your title as Crown Prince's consort. What more could you possibly want? A snowy night carried my life away as lightly as a feather. If I could live this life over, I would certainly keep to my place and never fall in love with him again. This year's winter snow is exceptionally cold. Your Highness, the woman from Liuzhu Pavilion is dead. Fu Lin's hand paused. The ink at the tip of his brush congealed into a droplet that spread across the official document. Is this another charade? She had staged such scenes countless times before. 10 years ago, she drugged him and climbed into his bed. Though furious, he married her for his mother's sake. She should have kept a low profile, content to live quietly in a corner with the title of Crown Prince's consort she had schemed so hard to obtain. Yet her greed knew no bounds. Day after day, she found new ways to cause a scene. Even knowing he would never come to her chambers, she still wouldn't let it go. His daily official duties were so demanding that he simply couldn't spare the time to play these childish games of love with her. This time, it's not a show. That woman slit her wrists. The snow is covered in blood. When she was found, her face was already deathly pale, and she was long dead. A snowflake drifted in through the window and landed on the desk. He brushed it away with his sleeve. Light and airy, he paid it no mind. He said, "Give her a proper burial." His tone was cold and detached, as if the dead were not his wife, but merely a stranger. As the sole son of the Duke of Zhen, the weight of his family's legacy forbade him from indulging in human emotions. She should have known long ago that the love she sought, he could never give. Having come to this point, it was ultimately her own doing. Scattered snowflakes drifted through the streets. Looking down, he saw the bustling, crowded thoroughfare. It was the Lantern Festival once again. "Miss, congratulations on solving the riddle. Here is your rabbit lantern." I stood frozen in place, hesitating to take it. "Miss, what are you waiting for? Take it. This is the grandest prize." My maid, Xiao Dao, called out to me. I snapped back to reality, turned to look at her, and tears welled up in the corners of my eyes. "Xiao Dao. It really is you." Being the Crown Prince's consort is no easy task. Fu Lin's courtyard was as impenetrable as an iron barrel. Those who sought to harm him couldn't get in, so they turned their fury upon me. Xiao Dao shielded me from a blade, her blood staining my entire arm red. I held her in my arms, weeping uncontrollably. Fu Lin arrived late with his men and rescued me from the blade. But Xiao Dao was lost to that night forever. The courtyard reeked of blood. Fu Lin led the bound and gagged assassins away without a word. Xiao Dao was my maid, and my childhood playmate. Without her, the cold nights in Liuzhu Pavilion have grown even colder. In this square courtyard, I raved, wept, cut myself, and smashed things, yet no one cared. My emotions went unseen, withering away with each passing season until I finally crumbled into dust and died in a forgotten corner. In my past life, I was reckless. I meddled with someone who wasn't meant for me. I have no one to blame but myself. I've tasted the bitter fruit of my actions, but those nights were too cold. I will never go back. That rabbit lantern is mine. Fu Shui snatched the lantern away, her tone haughty. I told you before, if I set my sights on something, I'll go home and get the silver. Don't you understand, shopkeeper? The shopkeeper forced a smile. Miss, this lantern is merely a prize for solving a riddle, it's not for sale. Since this young lady guessed it correctly just now, the rabbit lantern rightfully belongs to her. Fu Shui turned to glare at me. Hey! Xiao Jiyuan, you're nothing but an adopted daughter in my household. You've got no parents, no one to rely on. If you sing well, I'll reward you with a bowl of rice. You dare compete with me for things? Do you even think you're worthy? I'm taking the rabbit lantern. If you dare go back and tattle, I'll make you pay. She leapt lightly onto the rooftop and vanished. Xiao Dao stamped her foot in anger. How despicable. When we get back, I'm definitely going to tell the Duchess about this. I took her hand, my tone calm. Xiao Dao, it's all right. We'll just go look somewhere else. The Duchess had once been a close friend of my mother's. Seeing my pitiful background, she took me in and raised me in her household. Perhaps because she saw how sensitive I was, she gave me a little extra care. As this happened more often, Fu Shui naturally grew jealous and took her anger out on me. In the past, I didn't understand. I always tried to please her in every way, hoping to earn a little of her favor. Now that I've been given a second chance at life, I've gained a bit more peace of mind. Why force oneself to be liked? I turned around, my nose bumping hard against the man's firm chest. Ah! His large hand grabbed my shoulder, steadying me as I was about to fall. Seeing the redness at the corners of my eyes, he paused for a moment before saying coldly, "It's just a rabbit lantern, yet you're so upset." I stiffened. Those were the tears I'd shed just moments ago upon seeing Xiaotao's lost lantern returned. How could a cold-hearted man like him possibly understand? I just never expected it. Having died once and met him again, my heart was as still as stagnant water, devoid of any flutter. After all, the events of my past life were entirely my own doing. He treated me coldly, yet I hold no grudge against him. If anything, it was I who led him astray. He was originally betrothed to the eldest daughter of the Chancellor. Had it not been for me, he would have married a virtuous and gracious woman whose family could have aided him in his official career, a wife who would serve him with respect and devotion, growing old together. Instead, he spent 10 years grinding away at life with me, a helpless madwoman. Now, I regard him only as the son of my benefactor, an elder brother I ought to respect. I took a step back, dodging the hands on my shoulders, my eyes clear and pure. Greetings, Brother Aylin. Brother Aylin was the name the Duchess had me use when I first entered the mansion. Back then, my parents were both dead, and I had collapsed into the Duchess's arms, crying until my eyes were red. He was still a youth then, clad in black, standing tall as a pine tree. Though his expression was cold, he awkwardly offered me a piece of candy. The world mocks me as a vain, bed-hopping crown prince's consort, but in truth, it was love that led me to make that mistake. I loved the tender heart hidden beneath his icy exterior. I loved the words he spoke to comfort me when my parents fell on the battlefield. They sought righteousness and found it. They died a worthy death, all of them great heroes revered by the world. Some cursed my father for being reckless, claiming he caused the tragic deaths of 3,000 soldiers at the border. Yet it was clear that in that battle, my father had taken the head of the southern frontier's invincible general, laying the foundation for the great victories that followed. They sacrificed their lives to secure our land, ensuring a century without a single spark of war. Generals Liu and Shun deserve to be remembered throughout history. He held women in high regard. When addressing my mother, he used her maiden name. He held every soldier who laid down their lives and shed their blood on the frontier in high regard. How could I not love such a pure-hearted man? In truth, if it were him, even if I had to live on chaff and vegetables, I would find it sweet as honey. But no one believed it. After all, he was a peerless nobleman. Fu Lin visibly startled when I addressed him as elder brother. In the past, she had always called him by his courtesy name, Wen Yun. Today, however, she was addressing him with utmost respect as elder brother. In truth, he was well aware of her feelings. But she was not the candidate he had in mind for the crown prince's consort. Now that she had withdrawn her affections, it spared him unnecessary trouble. I won this just now on that street. Take it. A servant at his side handed me a flower lantern, even more exquisite than the rabbit lantern. I smiled faintly. Thank you, Brother Lin. I took it and handed it to my maid, Xiao Dao. In my past life, Fu Shui had indeed made me cry right there on the spot. He had given me this flower lantern to comfort me. It was merely something he had discarded, yet I had taken it and cherished it dearly, forbidding anyone else from touching it. Because of this lantern, in my past life, I had tossed and turned in bed, too filled with sweetness to sleep. I thought I had finally seen the light at the end of the tunnel and brought him to life. In reality, he was simply afraid that my affair with Fu Shui would reach Mother's ears and cause her further distress. In this life, that will not happen. I will put my feelings away. I will behave myself. From now on, we will coexist peacefully, each minding our own business. I have no desire to entangle myself with him. I curtsied. Brother Aylin, I won't disturb you any longer. I plan to go for another stroll up ahead. Seeing me leave, the servant standing nearby gaped in astonishment. Miss Ji-Yuan is quite different today. In the past, Miss Ji-Yuan acted as if she couldn't speak in the presence of the crown prince. Her tone was affected and so sickly sweet it could have been squeezed into oil. Just now, when Miss Ji-Yuan passed by the crown prince, he had already braced himself, expecting her to feign a fall so she could throw herself at him and he'd be ready to stop her. But to his surprise, her expression remained calm, and she glided past with such grace. She just walked right past. Crown Prince, when things are out of the ordinary, there must be something fishy. I reckon Miss Ji-Yuan is definitely brewing something big. Chang Song said with an air of authority. The Crown Prince shot him a sidelong glance. Noisy. He didn't care about her unusual behavior. If only she could remain well-behaved and sensible, he wouldn't have to put his mother in the difficult position of being caught in the middle. Did Shui give you a hard time again last night? The Duchess, exuding an air of nobility, walked into my courtyard, her face flushed with anger. I think she's truly lost her conscience. If her wet nurse hadn't told me, I never would have known she dared to make light of your deceased parents. Just you wait. Once that wild girl comes back from her fit, I'll make her kneel in the ancestral hall. She chattered on, oblivious to the tears welling up in my eyes. Madam. I'm sorry. I was wrong. I threw myself into her arms like a bird and sobbed softly. In my past life, I resorted to any means necessary to climb into Fu Lin's bed. Everyone looked down on me, and I saw the disappointment in the Duchess's eyes. Though she disapproved of my methods, she still provided me with a lavish dowry to save face. Your wedding to Fu Lin is set for 10 days from now. I'll help you this far. From now on, don't come looking for me again. Our bond is over. That incident of climbing into bed with him drained the 5 years of mother-daughter affection between her and me, and it also drained the close friendship she shared with my mother. No one could have imagined that the daughter of a distinguished military family would bring such shame upon her family's name and act with such shamelessness. To get close to Fu Lin, I lost so much. I lost myself, I lost the Duchess who protected me, and I destroyed the good name my parents had spent their entire lives trying to preserve. I truly realize my mistake now. The Duchess patted my back, her heart aching with pity. It seems you've been treated terribly. My dear little one, look at you crying like this. I shook my head and sniffed. No, it's just that I missed you. You've been visiting your family in Jiangnan for several months now. She chuckled softly, her voice full of affection. You really are my little bundle of warmth. I've actually found several young suitors for you this time. So you really won't be going to the flower viewing banquet? There's a top scholar from Jiangnan, my distant cousin, named Xia Heng. Though his father is merely a low-ranking 6th grade official, he himself is handsome and of upright character. He's bound to have a bright future. Besides, with me watching over him, he wouldn't dare treat you badly. I'd like to arrange a meeting between the two of you. What do you say? In my past life, she had also harped on these very words, speaking with heartfelt sincerity and always with my best interests in mind. But my heart belonged solely to Fu Lin, and I flatly refused. This time was different. I'll leave it entirely up to you. I feigned shyness and agreed to her suggestion. Seeing me agree so readily, the lady was somewhat taken aback. After a moment's pause, she took my hand and said, "I'm glad you've come to your senses." She was well aware of Ji Yuang's feelings for Fu Lin. But Ji Yuang was romantic and innocent, while her son was deep and ruthless, having grown up amidst political intrigue and scheming from a young age. The Duke of Zhan's mansion needed a matriarch who was meticulous and strategic, someone who could firmly establish herself within these grand, secluded walls. In the end, the two of them were simply not meant to be together. The flower viewing banquet was held in the rear courtyard of the Chancellor's residence. Inside the courtyard, the young lords and ladies who had been invited were dressed in their finest attire. Some admired the flowers beneath the trees, some played archery in the courtyard, and others watched the fish from the covered bridge. As the young people's gazes met, each hid a touch of barely perceptible shyness. I wore a peach-pink gown and sat under the pavilion sipping tea. Xiao Dao stood to my left and teased, "You look absolutely stunning today, miss." If the top scholar saw you, he'd probably blush so hard he'd lose his bearings. After our long talk last night, Xiao Dao was overjoyed to learn I'd given up on the Crown Prince. I've wanted to say this for ages. That Crown Prince may be handsome, but he seems so cold-hearted, he's not the type to cherish anyone. A gentle and kind young lady like you deserves a husband who truly understands your needs. So, to help me find a suitable suitor at the flower viewing banquet, she rose early to help me get dressed. You should wear these vibrant, soft pink colors. Dressing in such drab, old-fashioned clothes all the time doesn't do justice to your flower-like beauty. Fu Lin is reserved and doesn't care for bright colors. To please him, I've been wearing dark-colored dresses as well. But what doesn't suit me simply doesn't suit me. No matter how hard I try, it just looks awkward. I wonder what that top scholar looks like. If he's ugly, he certainly wouldn't be a match for our young lady. I stuffed a pastry into her mouth. Xiao Dao, you mustn't gossip about others behind their backs. In my past life, I longed for mutual love, a bond as deep as the sea. But having been reborn, I harbor no expectations for marriage. I only ask that he be of good character, and that we treat each other with mutual respect. Oh, I wonder how I look, am I worthy of your young mistress? A clear, gentle male voice sounded behind me, tinged with a touch of jest. I felt a bit flustered and turned to stand up. I apologize. My maid has a flighty nature and has been rude. The man was dressed in blue, his figure slender and upright. Upon seeing my face, a look of admiration flashed across his eyes. It's nothing. I was just joking. Please don't take offense, young lady. He raised his hand in a bow. It is a pleasure to meet you, Miss Ji Yuan. My aunt sent me to the pavilion to find you. My name is Xia Heng, and my courtesy name is Changqing. You may simply call me Changqing. I curtsied slightly. It is a pleasure to meet you, young Master Changqing. Xia Heng had a handsome, open face. He spoke with wit and had a remarkable way with words. We sat together in the pavilion, conversing merrily. He often made me smile until the corners of my eyes crinkled. My gaze drifted casually to the side, and to my surprise, I spotted Fu Lin not far away. He had also come to this flower viewing banquet. He stood beneath a peach tree, facing Murong Lan, the eldest daughter of the Prime Minister's household. Your Highness, this is a protective amulet I begged for on your behalf. It wards off evil spirits and misfortune. Her eyes were filled with affection, her face flushed with shyness. He took it, his expression still stern. Thank you. He fastened the amulet to his waist. Upon seeing this, Murong Lan's cheeks flushed even deeper. She was the fiancée my father had chosen for him. He would grant her the courtesy she deserved. Witnessing this scene, the corners of my mouth suddenly stiffened. In my past life, as his wife, I knelt in the Buddhist hall for 100 days, praying for this amulet. I handed it to him with all my heart, but he casually tossed it aside. As the Crown Prince's consort, how can you believe in such baseless superstitions? In the future, do not do such foolish things. It wasn't that the amulet was wrong, it was simply that it came from the wrong person. Miss Ji Yuan, what's wrong? Seeing my tears, Xiaheng followed my gaze and suddenly seemed to understand something. After a long moment, he reassured himself. So what if his heart belongs to another? As long as he fights and competes, why should he worry about not winning the beauty's hand? He handed me a blue handkerchief, his tone cheerful. Miss Ji Yuan, has the wind and sand gotten into your eyes? I touched the coolness on my face and snapped back to reality. Yes. The wind was rather strong just now. I took the handkerchief, grateful in my heart that he had saved me from an awkward situation. In that moment of daze, I didn't notice when Fu Lin had already walked up to me. In truth, he had noticed Xiao Jiyuan long ago. Today she wore a peach-pink blouse and skirt. Her lovely features were so striking they made the surrounding flowers seem somewhat pale in comparison. I didn't know what she and that man were laughing about, but she seemed so happy, it was inexplicably irritating. Is this little sister Jiyuan? She really is beautiful. Murong Lan broke the ice first, with grace and poise. Sorry about that. When Yoon and I were getting a bit tired standing out there, so we came in to rest our feet. We aren't disturbing you and this young gentleman, are we? She batted her eyelashes, her gaze lingering on the handkerchief I was fiddling with, her expression suggestive. Just as I was about to say something, the crowd suddenly erupted into chaos. Assassins! Dozens of highly skilled assassins surged toward Fu Lin, forcibly separating the four of us. 2 masked assassins, masters of lightness kung fu, took advantage of the chaos to abduct Murong Lan and me. We were as helpless as fish on a cutting board, each held at sword point as we stood on the eaves in the biting cold. You rat, Fu Lin. You slaughtered hundreds of our axe and knife gang. My wife and children have all perished. Today, one is your own sister, Fu Shui, and the other is your fiancé, Murong Lan. Choose one. I will make you taste the agony of being torn between 2 loves and losing them both. The blade pressed against my neck, leaving a deep gash that stung with excruciating pain. In my past life, the searing agony of slitting my wrists still sends shivers down my spine even now. Having been given a second chance at life, I cherish it all the more. Big brother. I'm not Fu Shui. Holding me hostage is useless. The assassin's grip tightened. Stop your lies. In the chaos just now, I clearly saw that Fu dog staring intently at you, afraid you'd get hurt. If not his own sister, then certainly someone he cares deeply about. He turned and shouted at Fu Lin. These 2. Choose one. Or both will die. 3. 2. Let go of Murong Lan. Fu Lin's voice was hoarse. Just as I expected. Though I had known the answer all along, I still gave a bitter smile. In Fu Lin's eyes, I was always the one left behind. The assassin laughed coldly, whispering in my ear. I didn't expect that dog Fu to be quite the character. His eyes were glued to you, yet he chose the other one. From the high eaves, Murong Lan was tossed down like a rag. As you wished. Fu Lin leapt forward, catching her waist mid-air. At the same moment, taking advantage of Fu Lin's distraction, the blade pressed mercilessly against my neck, poised to end my life. At the very last second, a pebble struck the assassin's eyelid, and Xiaheng swept in front of me like a whirlwind. As his sleeves fluttered, a faint clink rang out, and the assassin's weapon was knocked from his grasp. He stood with his body partially turned to shield me, one hand still poised to sheath his sword. The cold wind ruffled his temples, His gaze was icy, yet it softened slightly the moment he looked down at me. "Don't be afraid. I'm here." I looked up at him, my voice trembling. "You're hurt." His left arm was splattered with blood. He buried his head weakly in the crook of my shoulder, his voice barely a whisper. "It's nothing." My eyes were filled with worry, and I didn't notice the hint of mischief hidden beneath Xie Heng's lowered eyelids. A single assassin wasn't enough to injure him. He just wanted Ji Yuang to show him a little more tenderness. "Fu Lin, are you dead?" At that moment, we were hiding in a secluded, cramped cave. Outside, assassins were closing in on him. The flickering torchlight cast shadows on the walls that looked like demons crawling out of hell. Footsteps grew fainter, drowning out the frantic pounding of my heart. "Search over there." Seeing that the assassins hadn't found us, I suddenly let out a sigh of relief. Beside me, Fu Lin lay severely wounded, covered in blood, and completely unconscious. I kicked him irritably. Every time I saw this man, nothing good ever came of it. Let's rewind 2 hours. It was the 3rd day since my assassination attempt. The Duchess was heartbroken and insisted on taking me to Fuyin Temple to ward off bad luck. I just hadn't expected Fu Lin to be there too. The Duchess's carriage was spacious, yet Fu Lin's imposing stature made the space feel cramped. Especially as his icy aura spread, creating an undeniable sense of oppression that made one dare not even breathe too freely. "Ahem." The Duchess broke the subtle awkwardness in the air. "Why has Lina come along this time?" Fu Lin's lowered eyes opened slightly, and he replied with solemn seriousness, "There have been many bloody disasters of late. We must pay our respects to the Buddha to ward off evil spirits." She froze for a moment, her lips twitching stiffly. Her son was a demon king of hell himself. He'd never believed in ghosts or gods. She had no idea what he was up to this time. Just then, a shout rang out from outside the carriage. "An assassin!" I was at a loss for words. Again. Arrows whistled through the air and pierced the carriage, narrowly missing my head. "Watch out!" Fu Lin wrapped his arms around me and ducked. "These men are after me. Escort the princess consort and Miss Jiyuan to safety." Chaos reigned, the smell of blood mingling with the clang of swords. In the crowd, I was forced to separate from the lady. Seeing me alone, Fu Lin shielded me under his protection. As we fought our way through the carnage, casualties mounted, and eventually only the 2 of us remained. Most of the assassins were highly skilled warriors. To protect me, Fu Lin suffered severe injuries and fell unconscious. "Ah," I let out a soft sigh. Fu Lin, heir to the Duke of Zhen, was peerless in the world. His father was a founding hero of the empire, his mother the emperor's own sister, and he himself was exceptionally talented, deeply favored by the emperor. On the surface, his life was one of boundless glory, but as the saying goes, a tall tree catches the wind. Behind the scenes, he had carved his path through bloodshed. Why couldn't I see it in my past life? I was so foolish to think I could live a peaceful life with him. "Fu Lin, I'm saving you this time. Consider it repayment for the wrongs I committed against you in my past life. From now on, we're even." I took out the wound medicine and sprinkled the powder generously over his blood-soaked wounds. "TSK. You really are a disaster." I felt a twinge of regret for my medicine. After all, the ingredients were expensive, and I'd originally made it to give to Xie Heng. Fu Lin groaned in pain and came to. "Don't move." I held him down, my expression focused. "The cut on your shoulder needs stitches. I just stopped the bleeding. If you move again, it'll tear open." The conditions were rudimentary. I pulled his hair to thread the needle and instructed him. "It'll hurt a bit. Don't make a sound, or you'll attract the assassins." He looked at me with a dazed expression. "You know medicine?" I couldn't be bothered to respond and brushed him off. I studied with a shaman for a while when I was living beyond the frontier before I turned 10. The battlefield was a bloody place, and as a general's daughter, I would often follow behind to treat the wounded soldiers. My fingertips held a fine needle, and by the light of the moon, I carefully moved it back and forth between his skin and flesh. I didn't notice that Fu Lin was staring at me, his gaze gradually darkening. The cave was dim, and I instinctively moved a little closer. My breath brushed against his shoulder, tickling him like a feather and causing his Adam's apple to bob slightly. Though he was accustomed to enduring pain, Fu Lin's heart was now racing more wildly than if it were being cut by a knife. He had always thought Xiao Jiyuan was nothing more than a delicate little canary, but seeing her now, so focused and composed, he felt a sudden flutter in his heart, a strange emotion rising within him. After all, she was the one who fell for him first. Fulfilling her wishes now might not be such a bad thing. The guards who had come to rescue him arrived late the following noon, kneeling before him in a crowd. It turned out that the Buddhist ceremony had been a ploy to lure the enemy out of hiding. His injury was part of the plan, intended to feign weakness and expose the traitor. He hadn't anticipated, however, that the assassination attempt would be so fierce, so much so that I became separated from the princess consort. He had no choice but to shield me, which left him hampered and ultimately led to his severe injuries and unconsciousness. The assassination was like a pebble dropped into a lake. It created ripples, but the waters gradually returned to calm. Since then, I have not seen Fu Lin for half a month. After the attack on the carriage, the Duchess forbade me from leaving the house, but Xie Heng would always send me curious trinkets to lift my spirits. All sorts of snacks, storybooks, and intricate mechanical gadgets. Each time, they were accompanied by a handwritten letter from him. The contents described his ordinary daily life. His words were restrained and polite, yet it was not hard to see the deep affection and concern within them. Xie Heng and I had already exchanged marriage contracts and set the date for our wedding. Having died once, I harbored no expectations for marriage. I had intended only to treat him with polite reserve, yet I was gradually won over by his tenderness and thoughtfulness, and I even began to harbor a faint longing for our life together after marriage. Until, one night, this peaceful and pleasant existence was shattered. I stood at the courtyard gate, looking impatient. "Brother Lin, what brings you to me so late?" Fu Lin's thin lips parted slightly. "I haven't been at the prince's mansion these past few days. I've been handling the assassin case." "Oh," I replied dismissively. "I must go to Jiangnan on a covert investigation. I'll be gone for several months." I pursed my lips and gave a faint reply, "What does this have to do with me?" Fu Lin furrowed his brow slightly. Wasn't there anything she wanted to say to him? "Take this," he said, pressing a jade hairpin into my palm. "Wait for me to return." I wasn't a fool, I could vaguely sense his intentions. Under his intense gaze, the jade hairpin felt scorching in my hand. "I don't want it." But he mistook my hesitation for the timidity of a young girl. "Since I'm giving it to you, you'd better take good care of it." With that, he swept his sleeve and turned to leave. I had no desire to get entangled with him any further. After all, I could always give this jade hairpin to Fu Shui when the time came. Now that I knew Fu Lin's true feelings, I began to live in constant fear. In my past life, I was utterly devoted to him, yet he cast me aside like a worn-out shoe. In this life, I've been avoiding him at every turn, yet his developed feelings for me. I smiled, but felt a wave of sorrow welling up from the depths of my heart. I asked the Duchess to let me meet Xie Heng, and she agreed, telling me to return to the mansion before sunset. Today, Xie Heng wore a moon-white robe, his hair tied high with a jade hairpin, his demeanor gentle and refined. When he looked at me, his gaze was so tender it seemed it might melt into tears. His gaze made me blush, and I lowered my head. "Why are you staring at me like that?" Xie Heng scratched his head, his eyes sincere. "Because you're beautiful." He wasn't lying. Ji Yuang was indeed the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. In his youth, he had once accompanied his master to the frontier. Behind the battle lines, the ground was littered with severed limbs, a sight so horrifying that even he couldn't bear to look. Yet she moved effortlessly among the gravely wounded soldiers. Her face was youthful, yet her eyes held a calmness and resolve far beyond her years. This woman, as pure as moonlight, took root in his heart like a bud, never fading with the passing years. It wasn't until he saw her again that he realized his love had blossomed into a full spring, spreading wildly. After years apart, their reunion was a fate ordained by heaven. This time, he would not let her go. Xie Heng had prepared thoroughly for this date. First, he took me on a boat ride across the lake to admire the spring scenery in full bloom. Then he brought me to the #1 dining hall under heaven, where the table was laden with all my favorite dishes. I was astonished by his thoughtfulness. All of this. The man who usually moved with such ease in the bureaucratic world seemed a bit nervous at that moment. Is there anything you don't like? I shook my head. How did you know I love these? I asked my aunt. I hope you don't find it offensive. He looked at me with a cautious gaze. In fact, it wasn't just the food. He had recorded every single detail his aunt had told him. After speaking, he took out a jade hairpin and placed it in my palm. I saw you liked it, so I bought it. Earlier, while browsing the flower hairpin pavilion, I had cast a lingering glance at it. But because of its high price, I had quietly put it back without a word. I never expected he would have noticed. A lump formed in my throat, and I turned my face away, whispering softly. You didn't have to do this. This jade hairpin is far too valuable. Take it back and return it. It's not worth giving to me. It wasn't just the hairpin that was precious, it was the young man's heartfelt gesture. I had never been held so dear by anyone. In my past life, I had long grown accustomed to scorn and ridicule. Now, faced with such genuine affection, I didn't know how to respond. Seeing me cry, he grew flustered. When I had composed myself, he asked again, Do you like it? After a moment's hesitation, I nodded. His eyes crinkled with a smile. I am your fiancé. It is only natural for me to give you gifts. If this hairpin brings you joy, then it is worth it. As dusk fell, he escorted me back to the mansion, his expression filled with reluctance. People say I'm marrying you to climb the social ladder and rise to prominence. You may not believe it, but I want you to know, marrying you is my true intention. My heart belongs to you. I will never take a concubine in this lifetime. May we grow old together, our love unwavering. The young man's affection was so direct and intense it felt like a burn. I hurriedly looked away. I felt a bit shy as I handed him an embroidered sachet. Here, for you. He froze in place, then his face lit up with joy. For me. My name was embroidered on the sachet. He ran his fingertips over it, as if trying to etch those characters into his very flesh. It contains herbs to calm the mind. He hung the pouch at his waist and showed it off like a child. Is it pretty? My ears flushed crimson as I replied, It's pretty. I have to go now. I stepped over the threshold, but he grabbed my wrist. Let me look at you one more time, he said, sounding a little pouty. I added. The princess consort has set the auspicious dates for our wedding and asked me to choose. One is in 3 months, and the other in 2 years. I plan to choose the one in 2 years. A hint of regret flashed in his eyes, but he quickly added. 3 months is a bit too short for wedding preparations. A marriage is a major event. We must prepare thoroughly. Ji Yuan, I'll wait for you. I shook off his hand and ran away, then turned back to give him a mischievous smile. Just kidding. We'll meet in 3 months. Fu Lin's words had truly frightened me, and I desperately wanted to flee the mansion, to get far away from him. But in my past life, I'd married him in a daze. Even with Fu Lin's threat looming in this life, I still didn't want to rush into marriage, lest I find myself trapped in a quagmire once more. My reason for meeting Xie Heng was to gain a deeper understanding of his character and conduct. Knowing him to be gentle and upright, the restless anxiety I'd felt when our engagement was first announced miraculously subsided, and I found myself inexplicably at ease with the idea of marrying him soon. 30 li outside the city gates, Fu Lin looked worn out from the journey. Your Highness, the post station is just ahead. We've been riding non-stop for 3 days. Shall we stop to rest? On this journey to the south, they had used the assassination plot to uncover concrete evidence that the Prince of An was secretly maintaining a private army in an attempt to rebel, thereby eliminating a major threat for His Majesty. The Emperor was overjoyed, and Fu Lin hoped to use this achievement to secure an imperial decree granting him permission to marry Ji Yuan. Yet, though only 3 months had passed, it felt like an eternity, and he missed the capital terribly. What was she doing? Was she thinking of him and crying in secret? The moment this thought crossed his mind, he grew impatient. Spur the horse on, we must return to the capital at once. He arrived home at the hour of you. Yet the mansion was far from quiet. Red silk banners hung high above the gates, and lanterns lit the night as brightly as day, creating a scene of festive celebration. Lina, you're back. The Duchess was also dressed in red today, radiant and dazzling. You know Sister Jiuan is getting married today. Hurry and wash up so we can go to that Xie boy's house for the wedding banquet. Fu Lin's expression darkened ominously. Qiao Jiuan? Getting married? It wasn't that he didn't know about Xie Heng and Jiuan's engagement. He simply didn't care. It was merely an engagement. He could find an excuse to break it. Jiyun's heart belonged to him, not that pale-faced scholar. As long as he performed a great service and sought an imperial decree to marry her. Even with the vast difference in their social standing, he could still make her his primary wife. Why didn't she wait for him? A dull ache gripped his heart, and even his breath seemed laced with pain. Feelings of resentment, panic, and helplessness swirled within him, and the corners of his lips curled slightly in a cold sneer. Qiao Jiyuan, you were the one who provoked me first. How dare you try to slip away so easily? So what if they're married? I'll just take her by force. On the wedding night, I sat on the carved wooden bed, clad in a crimson bridal gown. Xie Heng never showed up. Instead, Fu Lin knocked me unconscious and carried me out of the mansion. He hid me in an exquisite courtyard, attending to my every need with meticulous care. My clothes, food, and daily necessities were all of the finest quality. I remained cold toward him, and the loathing in my gaze only deepened. Wounded by my indifference, his eyes took on a humble, pleading look, as if his pride had been shattered. Jiyuan, will you love me again? My hands were bound by chains, and my eyes were filled with icy coldness. Fu Lin, do you even know what love is? People like you were born to view everything as mere ants. Have you ever truly respected me? Fu Lin's eyes turned crimson. I didn't want to either. But if I didn't lock you up, you'd run away. You were the one who loved me first. Why don't you love me anymore? I had no desire to argue with him, so I replied with silence. Why don't I love him? Because the price was too painful, painful enough to be etched into my very soul. By the 3rd month of my imprisonment, he still refused to let me go. He didn't touch me, yet he slept by my side every night. Even when I plunged a hairpin into his chest, blood pouring from the wound, he still refused to leave. One night, he was drunk, and he stared at me with a look of obsession. Ji Yuang, why don't you love me anymore? He was the crown prince of the royal household, tasked with upholding the family's honor. He had to remain clear-headed and rational at all times, making the most advantageous decisions, yet every time he met my icy gaze, he would lose control and go mad. I've toyed with people's hearts, but I never expected to lose to you. Is it only when I lay my heart bare that you'll know I'm not lying? He pulled out a dagger, took my hand, and pressed the tip against his heart. Stab me here. The sharp blade pierced his flesh in an instant, and blood gushed out in a torrent. Terrified by his madness, tears streamed down my face. Fu Lin, have you lost your mind? Seeing my emotional turmoil, he laughed maniacally, looking satisfied. Ji Yuan, you do care about me after all. With that, he lost too much blood and fell unconscious. I hurried to staunch the bleeding. I hated him for imprisoning me, yet I couldn't stand by and let him die. Fu Lin fell into a dream. In his dream, Ji Yuang sat astride him, clad in sheer gauze. Her eyes were seductive, her hand reaching out to entice him. His gaze darkened, his breathing grew heavy. Their bodies intertwined beneath the dim light, filling the room with sensuality. Upon waking, he hated her scheming and berated her for her shamelessness. In truth, he knew she was a threat. He had always prided himself on his composure, never making a single misstep, yet he had made an exception only in her presence. The prince's residence required a crown prince with no weaknesses. An almost instinctive wariness had led him to reject her advances time and again. He watched as the sparkle in her eyes was gradually extinguished by her endless waiting in the courtyard. The once glamorous young woman now even smiled with a forced stiffness. Until the day news reached the mansion of her suicide, he had not cared. He had witnessed too many deaths. He had long since grown numb. Yet the begonia in the mansion no longer bloomed. Upon returning home, a lamp that had once waited for him until late at night was missing. The swing in the courtyard had rusted, and the delicate iris patterns on her cuffs were gone. The once vibrant and lively government office had returned to a state of lifeless gloom. He would never again see that young girl, as lively as a butterfly, brimming with affection. A belated, dull ache gnawed at his heart, the pain so intense it made his breath catch for a moment. In the 3 years following her death, he buried himself in official duties day and night, using them to numb the searing pain in his chest. Eventually, overwork took its toll, and he followed her in death. Before he died, he said, "I'm sorry. It was my callousness, my coldness, and my selfishness that ruined you." Had the dagger been half an inch off target, he would have died. Fortunately, I stanched the bleeding in time, and the imperial physician worked for 3 days and 3 nights to pull him back from the brink of death. Fu Lin woke up, and I instinctively took a few steps back in alarm. Seeing me intimately linked arm in arm with Xie Heng, his eyes betrayed his hurt, yet he still managed a faint smile. In a past life, he had wounded her too deeply. He had no right to stand by her side again. "You are newlyweds. May the two of you be as inseparable as fish in water, sweeter than honey." On our wedding night, he secretly abducted me. To protect my reputation, Xie Heng kept it quiet and instead searched for me in private. Outsiders believed I was ill and convalescing in the courtyard. When Fu Lin was injured, I went to Xie Heng for help. When I saw him again, he had a ring of stubble and looked utterly haggard. I threw myself into his arms. "I missed you so much." He kissed my hair as if it were a precious treasure. "I thought I'd never see you again." 20 years into our marriage, Xie Heng and I are still as deeply in love as ever, and we've even had a pair of adorable twins, a boy and a girl. The stern and impartial deputy minister of the Supreme Court, who was so strict in public, turned into a pure-hearted, clingy puppy the moment he returned home from work, snuggling up to me all night long. "Ji Yuang." "Yes." "Ji Yuang." He called my name over and over, and I answered him without a hint of annoyance. "Is this really not a dream? Did you really marry me?" Holding her soft, fragrant form in his arms felt like a dream. During the 3 months she was abducted, he had dreamed that she had married Fu Lin, that her days were wasted and unfulfilled, and that she eventually died in sorrow. Upon waking, he wept with heartache and began searching for her whereabouts day and night, in secret. Fortunately, heaven took pity on him, and he was finally able to bring his beloved home. Here's a rewritten version of that passage in a more polished, novelistic English style, keeping the playful intimacy and period romance feel. Ji Yuan, that Fu Lin is already past 40 and still hasn't taken a wife. Surely he can't still be harboring some improper feelings for you, can he? I pressed a soft kiss to his sulking lips. Why should we care what he thinks? That seemed to satisfy him completely. The corners of his mouth curled up like a placated little wife as he murmured, "Then tell me, you love me the most." "I love my husband the most. The very, very most." He bent down and pinned me beneath him, a wicked gleam in his eye. "The night is still young, and your husband intends to show you just how much." I truly couldn't understand it. Our child was already 10 years old. How had Xie Heng not yet outgrown this wolfish, tigerish appetite? Gently. I kicked at him half-heartedly, my voice carrying a teasing scold that held no real bite.